Hello, welcome to your latest deep dive from us here in the Met Office HQ. I'm Annie, I'm a meteorologist and presenter here at the Met Office, and this week we're going to be talking all about Hurricane Beryl moving through the Caribbean throughout this week. We'll also be talking about the UK's weather as well, what we can expect through the rest of this week, the weekend, and next week, is it going to get any warmer again? But the hot topic today is Hurricane Beryl, and I am joined by Julian Hemming, our resident expert on tropical storms, tropical prediction scientist, I think it is, isn't it?
That's right, Annie, yes.
Hello, Julian.
Hello.
Thank you very much for joining me. Could you start off by just telling us a little bit about your role here in the Met Office?
Yes, my role is basically to do a lot of work to do with tropical cyclones worldwide. That can have a big range of things that I do, from even going right into the computer code in our model to try and represent the way tropical cyclones are formed in the model. But it goes right through to evaluating the model forecasts and then making sure we have the right products going out to warning centres around the world and having relationships with those warning centres, making sure they're getting what they want from us. And then also doing things like this, explaining to people what's going on and why things like this are happening.
Yeah, and so it's really important to know that here at the Met Office, we're not just looking at the UK's weather. We are sort of the UK's main meteorological society or office, but we are also looking around the world at key impactful weather as well. And Hurricane Beryl is the main thing going on at the moment, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. I mean, the Met Office is a global forecasting centre, so although Hurricane Beryl and others like it are not going to have any direct impact on the UK, we run a global model, and as I've said, there are regional agencies around the world, like, for example, the National Hurricane Centre, who look after this area where Beryl is, which they like to get information from a variety of models from different agencies, and one of those is the Met Office model. So we provide them with that information and other products. And so even though we won't be directly affected by Beryl, that's what we do. But I should add that sometimes Atlantic hurricanes like this can turn whilst they're back out over the ocean and head towards the UK as extratropical or post-tropical storms. And so that's another reason why we're interested in them.
Yeah, okay. And could you just give us a little bit of background on the hurricane season and how they form?
Yes, in the Atlantic, the hurricane season officially runs from the 1st of June to the 30th of November. Now, that doesn't mean you'll get non-stop activity all through that period. Occasionally, we'll get early season storms. And in fact, in the last 10 years or so, we've had quite a few weak storms developing in May time. And normally, the early part of the season through June and July, we will start to get a gradual build-up of storms. Normally, they would be around the fringes of the basin, so you might get a storm in the Gulf of Mexico or in parts of the subtropical Atlantic. And it's not normally until the real peak season, which runs from about mid-August through to mid to late October, that you get the really powerful storms developing in the deep tropics and going through the Caribbean or up towards the eastern coast of the USA. But this year, we've got an exception in Hurricane Beryl. Yeah,
so it's a major hurricane level, Category 5, isn't it? It has been made this morning, was it? The Category 5?
Yes, it was. Yes, early this morning it was upgraded to Category 5.
And so it's Beryl, that's, if I understand, it goes alphabetically, doesn't it? So that's second in the season. So what else has happened so far this season? I think this may need a bit of explaining.
I can explain this plot. This is called a Hofmöller diagram. And what this shows you is what we call African easterly waves. Now, most Atlantic hurricanes, or a large proportion of them, will develop. If you look at this little map down the bottom, which shows the coast of Africa here and then the tropical Atlantic, now most of the storms will develop from disturbances in the weather which come off the coast of Africa, and at some point they might turn into tropical storms as they move across this way. Now this plot shows a kind of timeline, so the longest to go is at the top, so it's actually June, the 12th of June at the top, and then it progresses down. The black line is today, and below that is the forecast from our global model for the next 7 days. And these marked lines on here show the African easterly waves. Now, you can see earlier in June, they weren't very coherent. You could sort of make them out, but there's not much going on there. And in fact, this kind of blob over here, around about 18th to the 20th of June, if you look down, it should match up on the map with this area, Gulf of Mexico. That was Tropical Storm Alberto, which was the first storm of the season, which was fairly short-lived, moved into Mexico, but it did produce some heavy rain and some storm surge along the Texas coast. And then we have other easterly waves here. Now this dark one is Hurricane Beryl, and you can see it originated over here, became very strong, developed into the hurricane. This is where we are now, so the hurricane's here, and we expect it to continue that way along. Oops.
Oh, I'll get it back for you.
I was going to do that.
It's got to happen once.
It's going to travel through the Caribbean Sea here. There's another one here, which you can see is located here now, which was in the Gulf of Mexico. And in fact, there was a very brief tropical storm, Chris, in the southern Gulf of Mexico. So we've had the C storm already as well, after the B storm. Now you'll see there's a couple of other waves here, which are shown on the diagram. So there are more easterly waves developing behind Beryl. This one here, there is a chance it could develop into a storm, but it's not such a high chance as there was with Beryl. So we don't expect another severe hurricane from this one. And I should say, not all of these easterly waves will develop into tropical storms. It's dependent on the conditions they meet, both in the ocean surface and in the atmosphere, as to whether they actually develop into tropical storms. But Beryl's the one you can see from the very dark colours how it became very strong as it moved through this region.
Okay, so the African easterly waves is the origin, and then that could then turn into the tropical storms and hurricanes at the highest level. Category 5 is the highest level, isn't it? And that's what Beryl has been. Is it still Category 5?
It's still Category 5 as we speak, yes.
And so what's happened with Beryl so far?
Well, it formed out east of the Caribbean in the tropical Atlantic. And at the time it became a hurricane, which was late June, it was actually the most easterly hurricane on record to have developed, because we have had other hurricanes develop earlier in June in previous seasons, but most of them tend to be around the fringes of the basin, as I said, up towards Gulf of Mexico. But this one being, what you can see here, these islands here are the Windward Islands, so you can imagine the Caribbean Sea is that way and the tropical Atlantic is that way, and Beryl developed way out here. And that's the furthest east that a hurricane had developed. It continued moving towards the Caribbean and strengthened. And at this point, which was on Monday afternoon, you can see an island sitting there in the eye of the hurricane. That's an island called Carriacou, which is in the Grenadines. And at this point, this is a radar picture, by the way, which shows the rainfall associated with the hurricane. And at this point, it was Category 4, and so that meant that we suspect the winds around the centre, just around the eye here, were around 150 miles an hour as it passed over Carriacou. And we've seen there's various footage out there online showing the impacts of Hurricane Beryl on Carriacou. And then it's continued moving into the Caribbean Sea, so away from land, and it continued strengthening in the coming hours after that, which is why we're now up to Category 5. So the estimated wind strengths are now around 165 miles an hour, and that is incredibly early in the season to have a storm of that strength. Category 5, 165 mile an hour winds. The earliest on record that we've ever had a hurricane reach those wind strengths was on the 5th of August.
Wow,
and that
over
was,
a month
that was Hurricane Allen in 1980. So it shows that we're kind of a full month ahead of the previous record for a storm of this strength so early in the season.
It's unprecedented, as you were telling me earlier. And is there a key reason why we're seeing such a major hurricane so early on in the season? Well,
I think for that we probably need to go to the a diagram which illustrates something about the ocean heat content. Now, it's actually been well documented that in the Atlantic, sea temperatures have been very high recently, and this diagram shows something a little bit different. It's called ocean heat content, which rather than measuring just the sea surface temperature, it's an indication of the depth of the warm water beneath the surface. Now that's critical for hurricane development, because if there's a good depth of warm water, then it gives plenty of fuel for the hurricane to develop and become very strong. Now what we see here is a timeline of, it's the last 10 years. So all these little lines are the previous 10 years or so, stretching from January through to December, and this ocean heat content is for this region shown in the red box, so it covers the tropical Atlantic and the Caribbean Sea. So usually, a typical season, we get a low point in the ocean heat content around February, March, then it builds during the middle part of the year, and it peaks around late September, which is, of course, the peak of the hurricane season. That's what normally happens. The blue line is the average for the last 10 years. Interestingly, this line here, which goes right up here, is 2023. So it's last year. And then the red line is a little bit broken because of some missing data. It's even higher in 2024 up to the beginning of July. And we did see this sudden change around April, May in 2023, so just over a year ago. And there's still research going on as to why the ocean suddenly warmed like that over this time. It might be related to changes in the larger scale atmospheric conditions in the Atlantic, for example, where the strength of the subtropical high. There's still work going on to understand that. But we had this very high ocean heat content last year. We did have an active season, relatively, a hurricane season last year, but it might have been a bit tempered by the fact that we had an El Nino at the same time, which tends to suppress hurricane activity.
Okay.
But since then, in the last year, the El Nino is gone, the La Nina is here, and when you get La Nina and very high ocean heat content, then that is a recipe for an active hurricane season. So in some senses, although Beryl was a record breaker, it's not entirely surprising that we've had a strong hurricane early in the season because all the conditions are there. And if this ocean heat content does continue rising, even at a normal rate, it's going to be very high by peak season. So we're probably expecting a very active season to come.
So, yeah, we could see further major hurricanes like Beryl. We started on a very active note, and we're likely to see that carry on. So Beryl's moved through the Windward Islands last night. Where is it going next of all? I think we've got its track here,
haven't we? Yes, this is the latest forecast track from the National Hurricane Centre, so we can see it here sitting in the Caribbean Sea. The track is fairly straight running, a kind of west-northwestward track. There will be some variation in the forecast from that, so we can expect some divergence, particularly in the possibilities later in the forecast period. What we're looking at is the hurricane to move through the Caribbean. The next place under threat you'll see in the red blob here with the hurricane warning is Jamaica. It's possible Beryl could move over Jamaica or just to the south. It's uncertain exactly how close it will be at the moment. That will be kind of Wednesday evening into Thursday. Then it'll carry on and likely make another landfall over the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico on Friday, across the peninsula and then into the Gulf of Mexico. Now these symbols here indicate what the National Hurricane Centre think the strength will be. So M is a major hurricane, so that's category 3 or above. H is category 1 or 2 hurricane, and S is tropical storm. We do expect some weakening during this phase, so we don't expect Beryl to reach Jamaica as category 5. Because there is an increase in what we call wind shear, which is where as you go up through the atmosphere, the winds vary with height. The wind shear is very low here, but it's higher over here. So we expect some weakening, but exactly how much is uncertain at the moment. It could bring Beryl down to below major hurricane strength, probably still a hurricane when it reaches Jamaica. What state it will be in by the time it gets to Yucatan Peninsula, we're unsure at the moment. And it's even possible that if it gets out into the Gulf of Mexico, even as a tropical storm, it then could re-strengthen again before one final landfall, which is likely to be somewhere on this coast of eastern Mexico or Texas, and that's going to be right at the end of the weekend.
And so what sort of impacts are people preparing for when they're in this track, or the cone of the track from the hurricane?
Well, from the footage we've seen from the impacts that were in the Windward Islands, obviously if you're right at the centre of the hurricane, there's huge impacts from wind. And the wind impacts tend to be fairly limited to an area near the centre of the storm because the winds drop off as you go away from the centre of the storm. But there are other impacts which can happen a lot further away from the centre of the hurricane. So there can be large amounts of rainfall and that can cause severe flooding. We saw that even from Tropical Storm Alberto, which was just a tropical storm, say just, as that made landfall, that produced a lot of flooding, a lot of rainfall, and the storm surge as well. As you get a hurricane, even some distance from the centre of the storm, particularly on the northward side, as the storms move that way, you can get some really severe storm surge some distance from the centre of the hurricane.
And because it's moving through islands, they're much more sensitive to the storm surges everywhere. So
yes,
coastal.
that's right. I mean, we're looking at places like we've got the Cayman Islands here as well, which are not like this here direct strike, but they could see some impacts from storm surge.
Yeah. So it's an area as well. This is they're not unused to seeing hurricanes, but this is a particularly, it's the strongest it can be, Category 5.
Yes,
so
they would be preparing for this pre-season, but probably might be a little bit surprised to get something this strong this early.
Yeah, and as you said, we're likely to see more hurricanes, a very active season potentially through the rest of the season.
There was a whole raft of seasonal forecasts that came out at the end of May, which is usual, and just about every one of them was suggesting the ingredients were there for a very active season. Most of those forecasts were suggesting something like twice the levels of activity that we would get in an average season. So we need to be prepared for that. That doesn't mean to say we're going to get one after the other the whole period, the whole season. We might get periods of a few weeks where there's nothing. But certainly once we get to peak season, which is, as I say, mid-August through September and October, it's likely we could see some other major storms during that period.
Yeah, so it's something we could definitely be talking about a lot more over the next few months. Perhaps we'll have Julian on as a guest again if we have any such major hurricanes in the future through the season. But thank you very much for joining me this time, Julian. I will let you go, and we can talk about the UK next, something slightly less interesting to those meteorologically minded, but slightly less impactful. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
So from major hurricanes to a bit of a disappointing summer so far for the UK, let's have a little look closer to home and have a look at what the current setup is here in the UK. So first of all, I thought I would show you the jet stream. We've actually got a pretty active jet stream moving across the northern part of the Atlantic towards the UK for this time of year. You can see the jet stream, it's this bright pink colour, and it's driven by a temperature gradient. That's what creates the jet stream. So I'll just turn it off very briefly. You can see obviously we're into the summer, so it's not quite as cold to the north, closer to the North Pole. So the colours don't look as extreme as they would in the winter, but we've still got some of those paler blues and this tropical air mass with the Azores high stat to the south and west of the UK. And along that boundary is where we see the jet stream develop. And through the rest of this week, that jet stream will continue to move across the Atlantic towards the UK, bringing us a pretty changeable rest of the week. Actually, some fairly breezy days as well, particularly on Thursday, which is election day in the UK, and also some spells of wet weather. And it's going to be cooler as well, particularly as we head towards the weekend, as that jet stream moves across the UK. It's going quite slowly. I want it to be at the weekend by now. So by the time we get to Friday and Saturday, we start to move onto the northern side of the jet stream, and that's the colder side of the jet stream. So you always have the warmer air to the south of the jet and the colder air to the north for this jet stream that affects us. So by the time we get to the weekend, we're going to be on the colder side of the jet stream with our winds coming in from a northwesterly direction. So that cooler feel that we're starting to feel already, and some of us have been feeling through a lot of the summer so far, throughout June, we will be continuing until the weekend. Whether that will change into next week, well, it does seem like we will see a change into the start of next week, at least for a time, for the second week of July. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But first of all, let's just take a closer look at the rest of this week. So as I said, it's going to be a fairly changeable week through the rest of the week. We've got spells of wetter and at times windy weather. So let's have a look at how much rainfall we can expect through the rest of this week. So particularly through Wednesday and Thursday, we've got some potential for some heavier rain. So this is through Wednesday. Let me just go to the end of Wednesday. There we are. So the 24-hour totals through Wednesday, you can see it's particularly western areas. When we see our weather moving in from the west, it's western areas quite typically that see the heaviest rainfall, particularly northwestern areas. So parts of the Highlands, western Scotland in general. Actually, eastern Scotland will stay largely dry, but most areas you can see there's at least some rain covering at least somewhere in the UK. There's only a few places that are white through Wednesday and into Thursday. There's potential for across the Pennines, southern Pennines, to see some higher rainfall totals, and there'll probably be quite a lot of cloud around through Wednesday as well. So a bit of a disappointing, dull and damp day on Wednesday. And then as we head to Thursday, let's have a look at what is happening to our pressure pattern. So for Thursday, we've got low pressure out. We've got low pressure up to the north of the UK through Thursday, and you can see we've got some really tightly packed isobars up to the north and west of the UK, and that's what's going to be bringing us that squeeze, that breezy weather for the election day, particularly across northern areas of the UK. Actually to the south, it's still going to be breezy, but we're not going to see anywhere near as much of that heavier rainfall through across southern areas on Thursday. So Thursday is a little bit of a mixed day. Heavy, potentially thundery showers across northern areas, a much drier day with some sunny spells to the south. So each day this week is going to be, unfortunately, a bit different. So you're going to be wanting to keep up to date with the forecast through this week, because then there's another change as we head towards Friday and the weekend. With the wetter weather arriving to more southern areas, you can see this weather front starting to approach from the south. There is some uncertainty in the details of that, so this is one to keep up to date with throughout the week. We'll be covering more details in the 10-day trend and our daily forecasts on that. But in general, the trend for Thursday, let's go, it's Friday actually, isn't it, that I'm trying to show you? There we are, that's better. Our 24-hour totals is for much of the rainfall. Now the scale changes slightly, so the dark blues here mean 10 to 25 millimetres of rain. So none of this is particularly significant rainfall. The ground is relatively dry at the moment, so we're not expecting any major impacts, but it's more significant rain than we've seen lately across southern areas. Actually was a dry, quite a particularly dry June for many southern areas, central areas of England and Wales. So we've not had a lot of rainfall across southern areas recently, and actually through Friday and into Saturday we could see potentially quite a lot of rain across southern areas, with the dry weather this time actually to the north, and some eastern areas of northern England and Scotland getting away with a dry, entirely dry day through Friday and throughout Friday. So then as we head into the weekend, we've got that we're on to the cooler side of the jet stream, as I showed you earlier, and onto the cooler side of the jet stream. We've got low pressure still up to the north and east of the UK, so we're going to continue to see this northwesterly, oh that's the wrong one, this northwesterly wind direction, and coming in from the cooler ocean from the north and west will bring showers over the land across northwestern areas, potentially further inland across southern areas. So probably quite a blustery, showery day, a cooler feel to come throughout the beginning of the weekend. And then by Sunday, the pressure pattern, I think this just about will show us some of Sunday. It starts to become slightly more relaxed as we head towards Sunday. We're still expecting showers through Sunday though, and we're still in this cooler air. So, and because we've got less of a flow, as we call it, the winds won't be quite as strong. We could potentially see some quite slow moving showers on Sunday. But then there are signs, as I said, for the early part of next week for things to change from this cooler, more changeable regime, at least for some of the UK. Definitely not for the whole of the UK. So first of all, I'm just going to show you the general pressure trend. These are the regime probabilities. So blue are lower pressure dominating, reds are higher pressure dominating. So there's quite a significant jump from Sunday to Monday to see these reds return, the reds, the oranges and the yellows. And it's quite dominated, particularly for the beginning of next week, with the brighter red. That's a Scandinavian high, so high pressure centred towards the eastern side of the UK. So we're expecting high pressure to be dominant towards the east of the UK, and probably lower pressure still dominant across the west. So we're looking at a bit of a west-east split for next week. But with high pressure to the east, that would allow the winds go clockwise around a high pressure, so that allows a southerly wind to develop for some areas. So you can see this is covering up my key, but red is southerly on this map. This is the trend of southerly to northerly, or kind of indifferent between. So at the moment we've got these greens as sort of indifferent because we've got more of a westerly changeable regime at the moment, and then it switches quite strongly to the southerly wind direction, but with high pressure dominant to the east and low pressure dominant to the west. So potentially it will turn more settled across eastern areas of the country from at least the early part of next week, and for much of next week, before we start to see the return of things turning a little bit more changeable, with that low pressure dominating more widely by the time we get to next weekend. So with the southerly wind, what does that mean for our temperatures? Well, southerly direction, as you know, across Europe, it is much warmer than across the UK at the moment, and we could start to pick up some of those high temperatures. This map isn't showing, it's showing me not letting me click on it, but we are expecting the temperatures to increase across the UK, at least towards average. There is the potential, as we head towards the latter part of next week, that we could see temperatures across at least eastern or southeastern parts of the UK come a little bit above average, but it doesn't look like we'll see anything particularly long-lived or exceptional for the time of year. And in the west, it's looking like we will continue to see some pretty unsettled weather through the rest of next week. But I think widely across the UK, temperatures will return much closer to average, and with the best of any drier and brighter weather across southeastern areas, which will come in time for the second week of Wimbledon, after a bit of a cooler and more changeable first week to Wimbledon. So a bit of a change on the way from the beginning of next week, but for the next few days, a cooler weather will continue, showery weather as well. And then what's going to happen after that? So the long range forecast, there are just some tentative signs looking towards the middle to late part of July that we could see a bit more of a widely settled spell, just lasting for a few days at least across the UK. But those are very tentative signs, certainly something to be keeping up to date with, which of course we will be covering in all of our content across YouTube, our 10-day trend and our deep dives as well. Thanks very much for joining me today, and thank you again to Julian for joining me as our special guest. I hope you've enjoyed today. If you have, please don't forget to leave your comments. I'll be around to answer some of your comments throughout the rest of this evening and tomorrow as well. So make sure you leave your comments, feedback, like and share this video as well, and I will see you again very soon. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.